Hey class, I'm going to talk to you about the second pre-Socratic philosopher that you'll encounter in chapter 1 on the pre-Socratics. And that person I'm going to focus in on is Heraclitus. Now, there are other pre-Socratic philosophers mentioned in chapter 1, people like Pythagoras and Zeno and Anaxagoras and Empedocles and Leucippus and Democritus. There's a lot of other philosophers in chapter 1, but I'm going to be focusing in on three, or four actually. In my first lecture on the pre-Socratics, I talked about Thales and Anaximander. So this second lecture, I'm going to be focusing in on Heraclitus. And the third lecture on chapter 1 on the pre-Socratics will be dealing with Parmenides, who's a trip and very weird, but we'll get into him. So let's talk about Heraclitus. Heraclitus, we have fragments of about 100 statements that he wrote, and nothing in long prose like paragraph length sentences or expressions, more like little small fortune cookie, what are called aphorisms or epigrams. So typical of some of the things of the 100 little pieces of writing that we have from Heraclitus are things like, you cannot step into the same river twice. The way up and the way down are the same. Hot and cold are the same. Good and evil are the same. You get this kind of feeling that he's able to combine. He'll also say love and strife are the same. In other words, love and conflict are the same. Out of all things that are destroyed, creation comes out. So you get a feeling in some of his aphorisms that he's able to combine two opposing ideas in one sentence, because we wouldn't tend to think of things like light and dark are the same, or hot and cold are the same. We tend to separate things like that. So what could Heraclitus mean in these 100 aphorisms that we have of his? Well, it's not all that clear, and people like me and people who are professional philosophers, students of philosophy, spend some time on these epigrams of Heraclitus. And one way that you could look at, let's just take one statement, let's say light and dark are the same. And if you kind of think of a globe, and of course here we are in Chula Vista or Bonita or somewhere in the South Bay, it's June 15th as I record this in the evening, and you can see the light coming through the room. These are very long days. We're getting to the longest day of the year. Here in the Western Hemisphere, certainly in Chula Vista, we have plenty of light because we are in the Northern Hemisphere, and we're getting into summertime. So there's plenty of light, but at the same time, right now, at the same time, on the opposite side of the globe, in Japan or in Siberia or in China, it's completely dark right now. So in one way, you could say light and dark aren't the same. That would be the typical way that you and I would look at it. But for Heraclitus, light and dark are the same. So if you've ever seen Google Maps where they'll take a picture of, let's say, California, and then they go into a macro kind of take, da, 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 and you get the whole picture of California, you can kind of see that the further you get out, and then you eventually see the map of the United States and then the globe. Well, think about it. If you kept going out into outer space, we would then be able to see, let's say, the globe, the Earth, rotating around the Earth, and you would be able to see that parts of the globe are in fact in the light and in the dark at the same time. So anyway, but is that what he's talking about? Would he even be aware of the fact that there's a light and dark going on planet Earth at the same time? Would anybody have that kind of sophistication 450 years before the time of Jesus of Nazareth? So we're not quite sure what he meant. Let's talk about the way up and the way down are the same. Another one of these kind of contradictory statements. And if I could use the idea of a map again, if you look at a map of California, if you just kind of focus in on, let's just say, GPS, and let's say in the next couple of days, I'm going to be going up to the Bay Area where I'm from to go visit my sisters. They're all in town at the same time, so I'm going to go up and see them on Wednesday, June 18th. And I'm going to be going up on the 5, heading up maybe 8 or 9 hour trip. And if you look at the map, you can kind of just see that the map is going north. But again, if you do one of those kind of Google Maps, Planet Earth, and if you go further, and if you saw the whole state of California, you could see that the way up and the way down, or north and south, really are the same if you look at it more from a global or more of a kind of a space perspective. Then you can see Highway 5 as just being one artery in the interstate freeway system. It would be one freeway. It has a north and a south, but if you look at it as a totality, it's just one freeway. So would that be what he was talking about? Roads or highways looked at from space? Well, no, he wouldn't have had that kind of perspective. So we've got to kind of get into what he's talking about. He's able to put contradictory ideas together. So let's go into another one of his ideas, creation and destruction. Back in the day, way before you guys were even born, 20 years before you guys were born, I was still, probably heading into college at about that time in the Bay Area in Berkeley. And there was an eruption in North America. And when you think about volcanic eruptions, you tend to think of Hawaii, you tend to think of maybe the Philippines, you maybe think of Mexico City, maybe in the Mediterranean, like Mount Etna, or in different, volcanoes that are very active in the world. Maybe some volcano that's out in the Pacific Ocean, or in Indonesia, right? You tend to think of active fault lines. But in 1980, May of 1980, North America had this volcanic eruption. Something was happening just north of Portland and over to the west in the western corner of the state of Washington in May of 1980. We had a volcanic explosion, and I remember it, not because I heard it or anything, but I certainly heard on the news. Mount St. Helens up in northern part of the country, in the southwestern part of Washington state, erupted, and it was a huge volcano, right? 3 hours later, the volcanic plume had spread north. The wind was heading north and took all that ash into Seattle. And by about the volcano erupted somewhere in the morning, between 7 and 8 o'clock in the morning. By 12 o'clock noon, the air in Seattle had completely gotten dark. People were like driving with their headlights on, and there was a big ash cloud. In 3 hours, the ash had already gotten up into the stratosphere and headed into Seattle, and it started percolating down. It was incredible. These are scenes that we tend to think are happening in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. We don't tend to think of them as being close to Portland, Oregon, but that's in fact what happened. And I'll show you some pictures of the volcano, obviously, so you can kind of see what happened. The plume was going up 60,000 feet in the air, 60,000 feet. And just to give you an idea of what that means, if you're in a plane and you're flying at around 33,000 feet, or maybe even 35,000 feet, okay, you would only be about the halfway point. And if you ever look down from your window in a plane, you can see that 33,000 feet is pretty damn high. You can still make out the terrain below, but you're really up there. Well, this was another 30,000 feet on top of that. That's how much pressure came out of the volcano and went up into the stratosphere. And the tip of space is somewhere around 90,000 feet. So let's just say that you happen to be in some kind of spaceship or a plane or some kind of a space shuttle that could get you up to the very lip of the stratosphere. Once you're at 90,000 feet and you're looking up ahead of you, you're seeing black because you're no longer in the Earth's atmosphere. You're looking at the ceiling of going into outer space, into Earth's orbit, 90,000 feet. Well, this volcanic thing went up to 60,000 feet. It's coming out of the ground at around 200 miles per hour. I should put a little link so that you can maybe just see what happened at Mount St. Helens, because it's a trip. You don't tend to think of volcanoes in North America. So this volcanic thing is coming up. I've seen, Nat Geo and, Earth Week and stuff like that, because, I'm capable of being wonky at times, going into, Shark Week and, the kind of natural phenomenon nature shows. And there were rocks that supposedly were thrown out of Mount St. Helens, the size of school buses, So think of a rock about the size of a school bus, and they were catapulted out of the crater 26 miles away. So if you can imagine a rock the size of a yellow school bus being thrown from San Isidro almost all the way to La Jolla. So imagine, like a shot put, you ever seen the Olympic Games where somebody gets a 16-pound ball and they go, boom, and then they throw it up into the air. They barely are able to get 65 feet in the, great Olympic quality shot putters probably can throw the thing around 60, 65 feet, maybe hitting 70 nowadays. But anyway, it can't go through the air. It's such a heavy 16-pound ball. So imagine the Earth pushing out a rock 26 miles away, the size of a school bus. It's incredible. And how do people know that it came from Mount St. Helens? Well, forestry people in the environment around that Mount St. Helens National Park would find, trees that were carved over and a big rock sitting there with steam coming out of it. And they go, that had to have come from the volcano. So, that's how they know that, because the rock wasn't there before. So they know that, there was just incredible release of explosion. They said something like 100 Hiroshima bombs, okay? 100 Hiroshima explosions in this volcanic explosion. I'm going into all of that because one of the things that happen is that if you take a helicopter or a plane and you flew over Mount St. Helens, the devastation of the pyroclastic cloud and the Lhasa mud flow, all those kinds of geological terms that they refer to. They call it the blowdown zone, where this cloud is coming out of the volcano. It's going up, for the most part, up into the stratosphere, 60,000 feet. But sometimes that cloud, from the volcanic explosion, sometimes it also jets down the slopes of the volcano and comes down, and it's knocking down trees, just flattening them because they're coming out at 200 miles an hour. Just an incredible hurricane force wind coming out, and it's really, really hot wind. It's like something in the area of around 2,000 degrees, right? Because, imagine magma is coming out. It's around 24 to 2,600 Fahrenheit. It's rock that's melted. So imagine how hot the rock is in the center of the Earth to be turned into a molten state like lava. So imagine the wind that's all around that magma coming out, how hot it must be. So it's able to just knock down trees in the blowdown zone. So anyway, the interesting thing is that if you take a helicopter ride or a plane ride over the devastated area, which went on for 20 or 30 miles of complete devastation, it looked like the moon. The interesting thing is that within about a year, that devastated area started to experience something that people would not have initially expected. Earth science people would probably know this, but the general public would know this. And all of a sudden, all in that big ash and mud field that was left in the blowdown zone, you were starting to see these little pine cones and bushes, chaparral, all this sage, all these different kinds of, ground cover and trees, spruce, maple, elms, all coming up through the silty volcanic soil. And the weird thing about it is that this soil is absolutely the best soil for things to grow in. You couldn't find anything better than Mother Earth after a volcano, right? You can't go to Home Depot and get a better combination of chemicals in your fertilizer than what comes out of the earth after a volcano. And so hundreds of thousands and millions of little spruce and conifers and all kinds of, ponderosa pine, silver pine are all coming out of the ground in the blowdown area. So it's starting to turn into this green, lush, tiny little thing. And the weird thing about it is that out of all of this destruction, a new forest is being born. And, because I've read some things about this, the interesting thing is that all that ash that falls back down to earth is actually kind of warm. So if you can think of hundreds of millions of pine cones that probably will never even germinate. If you go up to Mount Laguna, or up in the Cleveland National Forest. I don't know if you guys ever get on Highway 8 and head out towards, up on the, Sunrise Trail, and you get out to any of those, green areas, especially after it snows or something, and you ever take a hike up in some of those trails, even Alpine and Julian, you can see hundreds and thousands of pine cones. Most of them will never germinate at all. Put about 6 feet of nice warm ash over those pine cones, and just imagine all these pine cones going pop, 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 because they're warm enough to release their seeds inside the pine cone. So it's this weird design in the earth that actually, out of all this destruction, a new forest is actually being seeded. And it's actually being seeded the very first day of the destruction. Now, you can't see it right away because all these seeds are underneath all of this ground cover and mud. You can't really see what's going on. But underneath, all these pine cones are starting to germinate almost at the very same time. So what is Heraclitus saying? Creation and destruction, life and death, strife or love and strife are all the same. So, okay, I'm not sure if any of this is kind of exciting for you. I don't know. But, I didn't really like Heraclitus before. And then, of course, you get a philosophy degree. They say, teach your first class on Monday and read this stuff. So I went from being a disinterested or semi-interested philosophy major. You always like some people more than others. And I never really paid attention to Heraclitus. And then one day, as I had to actually teach this, I was thinking, dang, Heraclitus is deep, because he's actually referring to an experience that we have, that we can observe not only within ourselves, but in nature, that things seem to need to be destroyed in order to grow. That happens to us all the time. The childhood that we have needs to kind of fall away, and then you want to play with toys, and your parents are saying, no, it's time for you to to do something else, or you move out of a neighborhood and you had friends, or you transfer schools, and there's this little death experience that we live through. And then, but there's also, at the very same moment that a door is being closed, a new one is being opened. Now, can we see this in real time? Are we aware of the fact that as one door closes, that actually is a new opportunity for life? We can't really see it that way because it seems to be nothing but destruction and chaos. Think about like love, if you've gotten to the point where you actually really were in love with somebody, you guys are different, millennials, a different generation than I am, certainly. And, and I don't know how seriously you guys take relationships, but some of you, you're old school, you fall in love hard. And think about how much pain there is involved when, something, people, families might have been involved, your girlfriend or boyfriend, you guys knew each other's families and stuff. And now that's all falling apart and you're going, man, what now? It's really kind of crazy. I have some stories that I could share to you in my life, but, you make your own applications and think, is it true what Heraclitus is saying, that it seems like we're dying, but out of that death, something new is coming out of? And I think that's what Heraclitus is getting into. You can't step into the same river twice. So as soon as you step into the river, you come out, dry off, it's getting hot, then you go back into the river. The river has already changed because life is continually destroying and creating something new. And all of that is happening in underneath this one umbrella of something called change. That's what Heraclitus thinks the principle of all reality is: change. He mentions the idea of a flame. If you ever look at a camera, a flame with a camera, you can kind of see that sometimes it shoots up and then it dies down. Then it kind of blows over to the right, blows over to the left, depending on how much wind is in the room that the candle's in. But the flame is always kind of taking these new forms as it's alive. And he's going, that's a metaphor for life itself, because the flame is life and existence. But notice that it's always kind of going through this metamorphosis, as you are and I am. Even with COVID, I mean, if you think about all the changes that the country's been through with, this racism kind of consciousness that we're developing. There were two people that were hung within the last month, a guy just a couple of days ago, and then somebody who was also found hanging, two black men found hanging in Los Angeles County, one in Palmdale. As you go out to Vegas, you pass Palmdale, and another person who was in near a homeless encampment. And people are thinking, well, maybe that was a suicide, but maybe not. So think about all the changes that are going on in the country, and you're going, man, it's just constant change. Hopefully, what Heraclitus is saying, out of all that destruction, a new forest is being built. Oh, and I should mention one last thing. I was going to end with a nice little kind of drop the mic moment. But there's this one other idea in Heraclitus I should mention, is that Heraclitus believes that there is something in the universe called logos. And we've mentioned that a little bit in some of our pre-videos, the first couple that you've heard. Logos meaning rationality or reason. Heraclitus actually believes there's something in the universe. We can't see it. We can't sense it, but we can intuit it in nature, especially when you think about the example of the forest that's growing after a volcano blows up. If you think about it, that always seems to happen in any devastated area that you can think of, whether the volcano was happening in Hawaii or was happening in North America or out in Indonesia or in Managua or in Mexico City. Wherever there's a volcano, ash is coming down, trees are going to get destroyed, but also there are seeds of a new forest that are coming in. Heraclitus doesn't see that as a random change. He thinks that there is something. If it always happens the same way, that implies that there's a design. If something different always happened, then you'd have to say, well, there's no design. But Heraclitus would think, no, there's something programmed in volcanic eruptions that creates new soil, new terrain, and new growth. So he says that always happens. There's a design, and he thinks that that's actually coming from some kind of celestial, non-material force, which he calls logos, mind, nous, N-O-U-S, which is also another Greek term for mind or reason or rationality. And we'll see this theme a lot in the work of Stoicism and even in other philosophers too, who see that there is a design in nature. Now, of course, modern scientists would say, no, there's no design in nature. Mathematically, we can prove that for every variable, we can always mathematically compute the variations, and everything is accidental, and chaos theory is reign supreme. That might be true, but in Heraclitus's view, everything is always happening as a result of a design in nature, which he calls logos.